I remember when they asked me to speak at the Sexy Secular Conference, my first reaction to the organizers was, you know I'm 50. Sexy was a while back. Then I noticed that I'd be up here with people like Nate Phelps and Daryl Ray, and I didn't feel so out of place. Because when I think of sexy, I think of middle-aged men. Holding a sexy secular conference on a college campus, it sounds like they want to record Nerds Gone Wild, drawing out the hottest of the amoral atheists from the student body. And the only way guys like me would traditionally be expected to participate in something like that would be in the capacity of clientele. But that's what I want to talk about today, traditional expectations and reconsidering norms regarding gender roles. Because one thing that a man of my age can offer this topic is how I've seen things change over time. Now, when I was a little boy, and this is more particularly true in my family than in the norm, but boys were supposed to be tough. And you weren't allowed to cry when you got hurt. As a matter of fact, I was many times criticized for crying if I got hurt, and I saw that my brothers were too. They had to be a man about it. For whatever reason, women were allowed to be little girls well into their 20s. They could keep stuffed animals, they could giggle, they could do all the childish things. That's fine for a girl. I was criticized by my family at 9 for still having toys. I was supposed to grow up fast. And I remember having the first time my father bellowed into my face that it was time to act like a man. I'm 9 years old. I think the last toy that I got was one of those motorcycles that you pull the ripcord and it takes off. I thought that was a pretty manly toy, but I was 12, and that was inexcusable. I had already been put on real motorcycles well before that. And my family didn't believe in training. They thought in a very Darwinian respect, put you behind the wheel, go. Give him a gun, see what he does with it. Send him out in the wilderness. If he comes back. So when I was 8 years old, my father wanted me to run an errand. We were living out in the desert, in a place in the desert in Utah that looked exactly like our first pictures of Mars. It really did. And so they have this one tiny little shack out in the desert. You can see out on the horizon there's this other little shack. My dad tells me to go out there, retrieve something. I don't remember what it was. I was 8 years old. But he pulls the ripcord on a mini bike and tells me to go. Doesn't give me any instructions at all. So I'm on a motorcycle, technically, for the first time, at 8 years old, running across the desert. Those things only go 30, which would be fine, except that large, scary dogs go 35. And I really wanted to crap myself on that mini bike as I'm trying to outrun that damn dog. My stepdad, this might sound like a kind of a cool dad at the time, but my stepdad would allow me to raid the liquor cabinet, the gun cabinet, and take my motorcycles with my friends out into the desert at 15. Now, where we lived, the end of our street was the desert. And he bought these motorcycles from somebody that had lost a child of their own in a motorcycle accident. And they sold all of that kid's bikes to my stepdad, who gave them to me and didn't require that I wear a helmet. I figured out later on that he might not have been being a cool dad, but was trying to see if I would eliminate myself from his equation. I actually rode off into the desert 15 years old with twin bandoleros with pistols and whiskey on a dirt bike. Woohoo! But that was the sort of person I was expected to be. I was encouraged by many people, not just in my family, but in the general community. I was encouraged to drink. I was encouraged to read porn. I was encouraged in all ways to grow up fast, whereas women, as I said, had no such restrictions. No. Girls could be innocent and soft, sweet and pretty, but that wasn't for me. Now, when I was 12, I did this transition where they took me off into Colorado and decided to just make a man out of me all at once. And I remember they had this huge black stallion. And I said, well, I'd love to ride a horse. So they put a saddle on it, came back in, didn't even help me onto the horse. They just come back in and said, saddle's on it, go. That horse goes 40 plus, but not with me on it, because I weighed like 80 pounds, and I left the back. Do you ever leave the back of a horse when it's going 40 miles an hour? Gosh, that's scary. And then so they decided to teach me how to drive also. And they taught me to drive on one of those racetracks that looks like a video game racetrack. It's all hairpin turns and all of that. And it was on a mesa. Weird. So that if you screw up, you really screw up. And it was on a rainy day. And they put me in a 1962 Chevy 2 that had no windows, no glass, just a roll cage, one seat. I'm a 12-year-old boy. And I remember my father got in and sat on the floor next to me with his cigarettes and a 6-pack of beer. I don't know how long he thought this lesson was going to take. And I remember he just sat down and said, go. And every time I would do something like hit the brakes and the gas at the same time, he'd punch me. Because that's what you learn. Now, the men in my family, and as I said, this is more particularly true of me than other families. I would look at other people's dads, and they wouldn't be as extreme as ours. When I was a very young child, I was potty trained on a toilet seat that was mounted onto a rain barrel. It was cut into a hole in the raft that we lived on in Alaska. They put 2 houses on a raft. My dad ran a logging company. And we had to live on a raft because the place was surrounded by grizzlies. Only once did one venture out to our raft, and there's 7 men with rifles standing there to meet it. And it never tried to climb up. But to give you an idea, this is the kind of childhood that I had. We are literally talking about men who were dropped in the forest and built a town. And these are not the sort of men who ever wore penny loafers or slacks, never owned a suit, owned lots of guns, and were frontiersmen, old Western types, and extremely macho. So I had an incredible dose of this. I tried to imagine what it would have been like if I was homosexual and I'm raised in that environment. Because you couldn't just not be gay. I mean, it wasn't enough to be a strong, confident, heterosexual male. You had to be uber butch. If you ever caught yourself just relaxedly sitting with your wrist in this position, just flopped out on the couch, somebody would notice that your wrist is in this position, and you might get popped for it. Effeminate behaviors were completely admonished. And it wasn't all cultural. It isn't all entirely my family's fault or even my culture's fault, because I did notice that even as a prepubescent child, before there was any sexual expression, I remember having certain resentment against people, and I don't know why. I don't mention this only because I think it's curiosity. There were a couple of characters that I remember seeing on TV. Miss Hathaway from the Beverly Hillbillies is a good example. A woman that had a strong jaw and a sharp nose, no pronounced breasts, no pronounced figure, very short hair, looked very masculine. And I remember feeling a bit of rejection against this woman. She creeped me out because she didn't seem to possess the traits of either gender. I remember just naturally instilled in me, it would seem. I don't know if that was cultural or if that's natural. I really don't. And I remember having other issues like Michael Jackson, movie Thriller, when he said, I'm not like other guys. Well, I remember saying, that's damn straight. There was just something about, the sexual expression. I remember I found a little bit ill. And again, I don't know if it was because I was cultured to believe that or if that's in any way natural. But I was strongly conditioned, and this actually took effect with me. I was strongly conditioned to react violently against homosexuals. I was supposed to fear them, and I was supposed to attack them. And I remember this being deeply ingrained, so that I remember thinking that if I ever accidentally got into an elevator with David Bowie, that it would be self-defense to beat him up. Why the hell would that be? I don't know. But I know that that's entirely cultural. There are several people in Texas in the Tea Party, that even on our Board of Education, there are a couple that I know that have advocated that violence against homosexuals should be removed from the Hate Crimes Act if it is religiously motivated. They actually plead for that it shouldn't be a hate crime because you have a religious right to be violently prejudiced against homosexuals. This is the culture that I was raised in. I remember meeting some very sexually ambiguous families, and this is what helped me remove myself from the mindset that I'd been molded into. I remember there was a couple of girls. One of them was very cute. I had the hots for her. This was talking about in high school. And her sister could have been her brother. And if it wasn't for the fact that she had a feminine name, I wouldn't know. It was one of those people you can't tell what the gender is. But the family was a little bit more screwed up, it seemed, in the traditional gender roles than just that. The mother, in this case, was a firefighter at a time when women were never firefighters. And the father was a nurse in a time when men were nurses. And it was a little weirder than that. The mother was also believed that life in general was suffering and bad just in all respects. She was a very depressing person. And her husband, the nurse, seemed very friendly and supportive of me, trying to help me out however he could. And I stayed with them for a while. And then I figured out why. He had a crush on me. And at 16, 17 years old, I remember feeling pretty weird about that when he told me, "What do I do when I want some dick?" I'm like, "Wah! Don't talk to me like that." No way. I ran out of the house. No way that I could know how to react to that. And I remember at some point, I think I was 19, and I was hitchhiking. That's what I did back then, often. And I didn't think that was particularly dangerous. I mean, every now and then somebody would pick me up that was, say, suspect. Like this one time there was a California custom cruise van pulls up, and I open the door and I lean in, and here's this guy, about 55 years old. He's in a polyester sky blue suit, right? And his van is fully customized with wet bar and bed and all of that stuff. And I right away get a clue, right? I say, "So how far are you going?" He goes, "Into the street." "Okay, well, you're picking me up for different reasons." Out of here. At another point, I remember two cars stopped to pick me up at the same time. One was a couple of cool, long-haired stoner guys like, I looked like at the time. And they come up in this muscle car and slide to a stop. One of them falls out of the car because they're so sad. Okay, well, these would be the fun guys to ride with, provided you actually get somewhere. And the other one, who also happened to be closer to me, was this more conservative gentleman, looked like a college professor. And he just pulled up slowly and carefully. And I thought, well, you know what, if I get in the car with this guy, I'll actually get to my destination without being arrested. And so I get in the car, and the car starts to pull away into the highway. And this very nice elderly gentleman says, "I'll tell you that I'm gay." And he didn't have to say anything more. I said, "Ah!" And I jumped out of the moving car. I actually did. I think it might have gotten up to 40 miles an hour, and I leapt out of a moving vehicle. And I walked down the highway for hours and hours, and it was now nightfall. Nobody was going to pick up a guy that looked like me. Certainly not after dark. And I had a lot of time to think about, what was that guy really going to do? I was 19 years old. I'd scared people. When I would go through the mall, people would part. Just because I had long hair and a black leather jacket, it was enough. What's he really going to do to me? He's driving a car. Would it really have hurt me? Could he have really hurt me if I got in the car? What if I'd answered? What if you're not? That's okay. I know that's what he was going to say, right? And I would say, "Well, thank you, no, I'm a vegetarian, not a peanivore." And it would have been fine, and I wouldn't be walking now. I'd be where I wanted to be. And those hours of reflection, walking down the highway, prompted me to think of how absurd my entire life's perspective had been with regard to homosexuals and my reaction to them. I'd never actually met and known one, except for that one guy that freaked me out, you know, in a very pornographic way. Thank you for that introduction. Then I met one that was actually a friend. A friend of mine came out. It was the first person I'd actually known well. And he was, curiously, a drug dealer. And he drove a 67 Firebird with one of those engines that comes crawling out of the hood with a giant hood scoop and giant back tires. I mean, listen, you can't get a more macho car than this. And I looked at this guy, you're gay? How could you be gay? Drug dealer, hot car. No. We're not talking Swiss honey. This guy's potentially scary. And that caused me to reevaluate again. I mean, because it's one thing to see Freddie Mercury on stage and have a little bit of a reaction of, wow, that guy's queer, and it's so easy to tell. And then you see Rob Halford, Iron Maiden. Oh, a metalhead, right? Everybody in my generation said the same thing. He's gay? He's butch. Let him. Why couldn't I have had that vision? So the fact that he's super butch metal overrode the fact that he was gay, and I was able to use the conditioning for the uber butch macho rejection of the metrosexual to accept homosexuality, another form of conditioning that I had lived through. There's one other form of cultural gender conditioning that never stuck with me at all. And some of you may have this. Most of the audiences I deal with generally do have somebody that suffers through this and doesn't really realize it. And I'd like to help with that, and it's going to cost me. At this point, I have just over 90,000 subscribers, and let's see how many I have left after this speech goes online. Bear in mind that when I was a little boy, women were referred to as the weaker sex, and a lot of attention was given to all the things that women couldn't do, that only men could do, or that were reserved for men. I mean, nowadays we have female police officers manhandling criminals in the street, and that was unheard of, unimaginable in my generation. In the movie Aliens with Sigourney Weaver, not the first movie, the second one, there were no movies that came after that. But in that second movie, they had female Marines fighting alongside men in the same unit. And that was 1982, which from my perspective wasn't that long ago. I realize it's a lifetime for practically everybody here, but it's not that long ago, and yet it was a futuristic concept. It hadn't happened in real life. Nowadays, my own daughter is serving in the military, and she's going to be assigned to an aircraft that searches for submarines, and she's in the flight crew, and I'm enormously proud of her. And not only is she doing a very butch job, but she's not doing it in a butch way. She's enjoying every advantage of being a young woman empowered by her own income and her own abilities and having fun being who she is and living life. And I'm enormously proud and happy for her. Now, when I was a kid, women couldn't do that job. They couldn't be mechanics, they couldn't drive trucks or forklifts. That was typically masculine manual labor. And there was a strong division between the few jobs that employers would let women have and the work they thought only men could do. I mean, if the job demands so much upper body strength that most men couldn't make the cut, I can understand why you wouldn't expect many women to go for that too. But what I didn't understand was when a woman could qualify for the work and show that she could really do it and was still prohibited from having the job. I was really surprised to find out that men, or that women were not paid at the same rate as men, and I didn't understand why. One of the excuses that was given to me was that women didn't have to pay as much as men because they didn't have to buy their own dinner, they didn't have to pay for their own drinks, they didn't have to buy their own jewelry or clothing or pay for their own vacations, and sometimes even their rent was paid by someone else. The only advantage that women really had was that this was a time when women were the default winners of all child custody combat. If you couldn't prove that she was an unfit mother, she automatically wins. Now, this was a period of inequity that in Texas was only corrected in the last 10 or 15 years or so. And it is inequity, we recognize that. But women didn't have the financial advantage that was painted on them. I mean, it was assumed that if they had children, then they also got child support from somebody. And at that time, depending on where you lived, it was suspected that you might also have alimony. And so what was explained to me was that women didn't have to make as much money as a man as long as they remained dependent on men and all that that implies. Now, in the typical patriarchy of religion, where bigotry gets dressed in the disguise of family values, there are women who are denied positions in the priesthood. And trust me on this, I know from experience, that is a job women could easily do better than men. When I was a young man, I've known many women who are very skilled liars and bullshit artists. And can present whatever you want to believe, and you would trust them that it really is true. But I'm not bitter. Time heals all wounds. And I listened to a lot of excuses from various grown-ups in my life about why women couldn't fly airplanes, for example, owing to an alleged deficiency in their depth perception or a difference in their center of balance. Bullshit excuses that seem to be made up on the fly as necessary just to perpetuate the prejudice. And I was raised in a very sexist environment, but I don't think I was ever sexist myself. Although it may be that we all are, and it's just a matter of degree. My wife describes me as roaringly heterosexual. And I'm visually stimulated as men typically are. So I have objectified sexual partners, I'll admit to that. But I know women my age who do the same and have done forever. And we understand why we do that. I'm not saying that that's never a problem, but it needn't always be one. And that's not what sexism is. Sexism is similar to racism in two respects. One, in either case, it is not a matter of either side having strengths and weaknesses, which seems reasonable and could be expected. Rather, bigotry considers one group of being generally superior, regardless what other aptitude may be attributed to another group. Two, racists assume limitations on someone's potential based on their ethnicity, and they impose restrictions when they can to enforce that. Sexists do the same thing, this time applying double standards according to gender. That's why women have traditionally been denied certain jobs, been denied equal pay when they could do those jobs, why there are double standards for women's social behavior as opposed to men, and why there is a glass ceiling preventing women and minorities from reaching the upper rungs of the corporate ladder, regardless of their qualifications or achievements. There is one significant way that racism and sexism are different. There is no word for a non-racist, but there is a word for a non-sexist. Now, I've noticed that when I speak about science, I'd better have all my facts straight, or the scientists will jump on me for anything I get wrong. And I can bash religion pretty well and not worry too much about the reactions from the butthurt theists. But if I talk politics, I will immediately irritate a whole lot of people I didn't mean to piss off. And this still isn't as bad as when you say the word that means non-sexist. Once you utter the word feminism, you're stirring the coals of controversy, awakening a hornet's nest of haters, and they will twist whatever I say today into something I never said, never meant, never implied. And I don't know why it is that way, but it has always been that way. Where does this reactionary revulsion come from? Here in our lofty, intellectual, atheist, secular, skeptical communities, where we are more tolerant than everyone else because we supposedly understand things better than everyone else. How could it be that we would have so many people in our own ranks, including women, who object to feminism? That word has cultural stigmas poisoning it every bit as much as atheists, and nobody should understand that better than atheists. A couple weeks ago on an atheist podcast, someone told me that the reason was there's so many different definitions and that I'm using the wrong one. That just because you're not a feminist doesn't mean that you're a sexist. My friend D.P.R. Jones jumped on that comment, like the lawyer that he is, and pulled up a half a dozen different dictionaries, all of which gave the exact same one and only definition that I use. A feminist is one who advocates equal rights and treatment for women. That's it. That's the only definition there is or ever was. Although there is a colloquialism that feminism is the radical idea that women are people too. Now, if you look at the actual definition in the negative, you'll see that a non-feminist is someone who does not advocate gender equality, meaning that they will accept gender inequality, which is exactly what sexism is, and I'm right again. If you are not a feminist, you are a sexist by definition. But it's not a dichotomy. If you are sexist to a degree, you are feminist beyond that degree. So to the degree that you support equal rights for women, what does that mean? Does that mean that all men are created equal to other men? And that all women are equal to each other, but on a different standard than men? Obviously not. It means that women should be considered equal to men. So it is nothing short of embarrassing for me as a man when men's rights activists chime in saying, equal rights for women? What about equal rights for men? What is it about the word equal that they don't understand? It seems as if they're trying to be more equal than women. It sounds to me like they're trying to secure supremacy. And if they really wanted equal rights, like they say, they would be feminists. And if women are not satisfied with equality and are actually pushing for dominance over men, as they allege, those women would not be feminists. Now, I've heard people object to feminism on the excuse that some feminists have gone too far. Whatever the hell that means. And rather than query them on how they quantify that, or even try to qualify that, let me just agree up front. Yeah, some feminists have gone too far. Accepting that as a fact, let me ask those people, does that justify the perpetuation of a sexist culture? I think not. And people tell me that it's sexist just to say that gender equality should be called feminism. Why not call it humanism? Because humanism already means something else. But if you want to call yourself humanist instead of feminist, that's fine. I think all humanists are feminists too. Now, last year, I went to the 71st Annual Convention of the American Humanist Association in New Orleans, where I had the honor of meeting Ms. Gloria Steinem. Now, when I was a little kid, Gloria Steinem was the leader of the women's liberation movement, and I think she was the first woman who was ever the CEO of a corporation. Now, she believed that women had the right to, or that women deserved equal rights and treatment, but that they did not deserve special privileges and considerations. Yet, everyone I knew growing up, including the women, referred to Gloria Steinem as a man-hating dyke who only wanted women to have power over men. I'm pretty sure that the wife of David Bale father of Batman, is neither a lesbian nor a misandrist. I've read criticisms of myself complaining that I don't know what direction feminism has gone lately. Yes, I do. Very well, in fact. It hasn't changed, and the reactionary attitudes haven't either. Not since Susan B. Anthony, an atheist, advocated for women's right to vote and was sternly hated for it, like women's rights activists are still hated today. And I don't understand why. Now, last week, Gloria Steinem spoke out about Miley Cyrus's embarrassing performance, saying that the culture should change such that women in the music industry did not have to sell their sexuality in what she described as the only game that exists. And recently, my wife and I, separately, both said something similar with regard to rape and how best to minimize that risk. Now, I understand that there are some sex-negative feminists. There are probably even some man-haters out there. But they are an extreme minority. And there are many outspoken sex-positive activists to drown them out. Feminism does not mean that men are deprived of sex. It does not mean that women should not enjoy sex. It does not mean that women can't be sexy if they want to. It's fun. Let them enjoy it. And don't shame them for it. Women have the right to be sluts just like men do. I'm serious. And just as we men don't have to be sexy, I mean, there's no cultural stigmas against us if we are not, women don't have to be sexy, and they shouldn't be shamed for that either. Let's just peel away the double standards. I think that's the best way to show appropriate respect for women. And sex and social interactions are complex, as is criminal behavior. But in general, it seems that raising the cultural appreciation or perception of women as independent individuals and all like that, just like men, is the best way to minimize occurrences of rape. It's not impossible to do. I've watched that change happening over time. It's still happening now, and we have control groups to measure it against. If you look up the map of the combined scale of the prevalence and sanction of rape and sexual assault of women, I will provide the link when the video goes up. What you should immediately notice is that in those countries where women are free to dress scantily, to wear bikinis, small tops, whatever, hot pants and all of that, these are areas where women can move freely without a male escort. They're not repressed. They have equal rights under the law. And in each of those countries where these women go about half naked with their hair uncovered and their faces out for all to see and wearing those hot pants and all that, these are the places that have the lowest occurrence of rape. And in those countries where women are sequestered, where they are repressed, where they are prohibited from speaking with men that they're not their husbands or immediate family members, where they are not permitted to drive, where they're not permitted to go places without a male escort, these are the places where rape is not only more prevalent, but common. And this is because it is endorsed by the society to some degree. Even if they don't openly endorse it, they'll still tolerate it. They'll still blame the victim and punish her accordingly. Now, the idea that this topic, the feminism, sexism topic, has in the last couple of years or so divided the atheist community is a triviality that I find intolerable. I live in Texas. We are overrun with theists, and they are powerful. We are outnumbered, we are outgunned, we are outfinanced by millions of dollars. I went to the Global Atheist Convention in Melbourne, Australia. I was very proud to see the epic thing where on that Sunday they had it standing room only. There's a huge stadium. 5,000 atheists from around the world filled that stadium. We have 7 churches in my hometown that are bigger than the Civic Center in Melbourne, and they fill it twice a week, every one of them. This is what we're up against. The theists will put away whether they are Protestant, whether they're Mormon, whether they're Catholic, whether they're Muslim or Jewish or Hindu, and they will hold hands together against us while we eat our own over trivialities that have us basically like 2 sheep butting heads, surrounded by a sea of hungry wolves. We really need to unify. We need to put this down. We need to stop arguing about these types of trivialities and realize we have a common enemy that is using that against us, and they already have all the power and all the money in it that they need to keep that power, and that anything we might do to affect political change and better this planet is only going to be done by working together and putting these differences aside.
Here, here.
Are there any questions? Yes.
How do you respond to, well, first of all, thank you very much for sharing some of those intimate moments of your life. How do you respond to someone, I get this all the time, well, that's what makes you an atheist, those stressful experiences from your past, that's why you're an atheist. It's not any of these other things that you've spoken so eloquently about, it's because you went through a stressful period. How do you respond to things like that?
Can you repeat the question back?
If I could, he says, how do I respond to people that take these traumatic events of my life and say that that is the reason I'm an atheist? I explain the real reasons why I'm an atheist. And this is important. I was an atheist for 15 years before I realized what an atheist is. And I think it's important that other people not go through that transitional period. If you're calling yourself an agnostic, guess what? If you're not convinced that an actual deity really exists, you're atheist. Deal with it. And there's many reasons not to be convinced of that, not the least of which being that snakes don't talk. And if my donkey tells me he can't continue because there's an angel with wings, a hexapod human with a flaming sword invisible to everyone but him, and I'm listening to the donkey tell me that, it's time to get off that donkey and check into a hospital. I certainly wouldn't give people like this credence and financial power. Any other questions? You in the blue.
It's sort of a comment and a question. I want to applaud you. It's a very simple thing when we're talking about sexism. You mentioned the friend that father was a nurse. Do you realize how many people will still say, my son is a male nurse. My uncle is a male nurse. My husband, what the hell kind of a nurse could that be? My daughter, the female nurse, or my mother is a female nurse. In our society, I still hear people referring to my father the male nurse, my son the male nurse, my husband the male nurse.
It's a carryover from that time when such things mattered more. I mean, I knew another sexually ambivalent family that was, is that the right word? I don't even know. The son was a hairdresser and a female impersonator. His sister was a motorcycle mechanic with all the sexual eloquence of a redneck truck driver. The hell happened in that family? I don't know. I wouldn't pick a fight with the sister. But yeah, that's all that is. And it was very different. You know, in the generation that we remember, we viewed things differently than kids today do. When you see women in the digital fatigues and the combat boots, you know, going with their unit of men at the airport, that's not unusual to me. That would be a freak show when I was a child. This was said to be impossible, that it would never happen. And I'm glad we got over that. Greta, you had a question.
So when you say that we need to stop being divisive and we need to unify, do you mean by that people should stop speaking out about sexism in the atheist movement? Clearly not to speak out about sexism. But I'm wondering how you reconcile the desire for us to unify and the need to speak out against sexism and misogyny.
As the atheism movement grows, we are going to be more inclusive of demographics we don't agree with on every level. I mean, come on, we already have libertarians. We put up with them. We need to be accepting of the fact that not everybody's going to agree with us on every single point, and that doesn't matter. The religious people only agree on two things. One, they will believe in their mystic woo because they want to, regardless what the facts are, and that they can use other theists to help them with that. And the second thing that they agree on is that we are the enemy more so than each other. And we need to realize how overwhelmed and outnumbered we are and how ineffective we will be if we keep bitching at each other about ourselves, fighting amongst ourselves over every little thing we disagree on. Put it aside. Yes?
What do you think the best response is to be running across other atheists on Facebook who are clearly misogynist assholes?
I don't want to repeat myself in this speech, but it really is as simple as I laid it out to be. Okay, if you're saying that there should be different rules applied or different behaviors imposed, that women will reduce their chances of rape if they act more like the women in Saudi Arabia do, there's a contradiction there. I tell you, it doesn't matter how beautiful a woman is or how naked she may be. The top 5 most attractive women in this college can come and give me a lap dance in my hotel room tonight, and they will not be raped. And I'm willing to conduct that experiment. Anything else? Yes, sir.
On your statement regarding agnostics, they're basically atheists. I think the counter argument would have been, yes, they're not convinced there's a God, but they also don't have enough evidence that there isn't, and it's like more like an organic.
Yes or no question. Are you convinced that an actual deity, by definition, you can't define a god as being, by definitional fiat, to exclude Apollo and Thor and people that millions of other people have worshipped for thousands of years. We can't do that.
Right.
If you're going to categorize all deities by one summary statement, I would say, according to my studies, that would be magical, anthropomorphic immortals. Are you convinced that a magical, anthropomorphic immortal really exists? Until the point that you are convinced of that, you're not convinced of that. And if you're not convinced there's not one, that means you're not convinced there is one. You're atheist.
Yeah, my question is.
I'm sorry. I'm an asshole. I'm sorry.
Thank you, I'm match. Do you agree that it's more like an internal, organic, wandering struggle for a person who actually made that journey from being agnostic to firm atheist?
Agnostic answers a different question. What agnostic, and people will want to argue that somebody way back when, that Huxley used it in a different way than everybody else in history did. The Gnostics predate Christianity, and they were all about asserting their speculations as faith-based revelation, asserting their personal beliefs as if it was factual knowledge. That's what Gnosticism is. The question that agnosticism asks is whether humans can ever claim definite knowledge of anything having to do with the supernatural. The reality is, since it's entirely speculative, since there's no data, and since knowledge is demonstrable with measurable accuracy, no. My answer would be it is not possible for humans, even if they've experienced the supernatural, even if they've been out, astral projection or whatever it is that you personally experienced. We don't know for sure that that really happened. If you've got no way to verify it to any degree at all, by any means whatsoever, you don't know whether that happened to you. And so that's the question, whether you can have knowledge. That's not whether you believe. Belief is a conviction. And if you don't believe, you're not convinced. It's a yes or no question. There's only whether you have theism or whether you are without theism. There's no middle ground there. You in blue.
Last question. Yeah,
beat a dead horse here, but I was listening to a podcast this morning with Neil deGrasse Tyson, and he says the reason that he's an agnostic is because he doesn't follow the whole atheist crowd. He's more of a scientist, and he says there's no name for his kind of person. So he's just going to go ahead and call himself an agnostic.
Neil deGrasse Tyson has admitted previously that the word atheist does apply to him. And this enrages him because he hates the word so much, he says the word should not exist because it applies to him. And Carl Sagan also refused to use that label because it had been so poisoned, and because so many people had been lied to about what it means. Carl Sagan said that an atheist knows there's no God. An atheist knows a great deal more than I do. By some definitions, he said, atheism is pretty stupid. Yes, by the wrong definition, atheism is stupid. I wish that I could address this to Carl Sagan, one of the best atheists we've ever had, and so is Neil deGrasse Tyson, one of the best models of atheism we've ever had. And both have rejected that name. At least Tyson knows what it means, and Sagan sadly never did.
I agree.
And I think, I'm sorry, Fitzgerald.
I just want to jump in and say the two terms aren't mutually exclusive. You can be agnostic and atheist.
And most of us are. Yeah, I'm in the very rare position of being agnostic atheist. Since God is defined by his miraculous abilities, which are defined by science as being physically impossible, which means he's impossible by definition, and also that God exists outside this universe, which means he doesn't exist in reality, again by definition. That, and because there's no evidence of him, and as Hitchens said, that which is asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. And I'm done.